Yes, it's right. It's time to talk to Mitch Sherman of The Athletic. Mitch, welcome in.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. We're getting through it. Hanging in.
Good. That's kind of how I feel too.
Yeah. Hey, you're a guy who's done some road trips over the years. We were talking in the crossover. Favorite drive. Do you have a favorite drive that you like to take?
You mean like a drive that I would normally have taken, like somewhere that I would go on a regular basis, or just like the best place I've ever driven on a road trip, period?
Either one. Both. Give us both. Yeah.
Okay, so
we got time.
Like coming out of the state of Nebraska and going places that I would have gone like on various times in my road tripping career. I mean, hey, look, if you're driving out of Nebraska, you're going into Kansas or Iowa or Missouri. Like none of that is really doing a lot for me.
Yeah.
On like the scenery.
Uh-huh.
So the shorter, the better.
Yep.
I'd say like my favorite road trip would be going to like Iowa State because it only takes a couple hours to get there, and it's interstate. But I will say, like, where I've driven, where I've been like, man, I could drive this way for 10 hours, and I don't think that I would ever really get tired of what it's like. So one time I drove from San Diego to Omaha, and the entire drive was not great, but like the part where you go through Utah and western Colorado.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed myself. Like I loved looking around and seeing everything. And it was in the summertime too, so I didn't have to worry about snow and ice.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good answer. We'll accept it. All right.
Okay.
Let's let's get into some sports things. I was just talking about it was a story on The Athletic about Kirby Smart and Dabo lamenting the fact they were going to get a scholarship increase and the reasons why that's a bad thing. Like, does it make sense to you that coaches would think this is a bad thing?
I understand it with Georgia, and I guess Clemson is like living in the same world, and that's probably why Dabo feels that way. So Georgia, they don't need 105 players. Georgia's good with 85. I mean, Georgia's built like an NFL team. And you think about an NFL roster and like what how many players do they have that if, in the NFL world, how many players are on their payroll, like making over the league minimum. Like they have 53. Yes, there's a practice squad, and so that's where you get into the importance of like having 85. But like beyond that, there's just not a lot of use for those kind of guys at Georgia, and additional scholarships, all they do is like dilute down the money pool. So, Georgia, despite what people think of that, I mean, no school has unlimited resources when it comes to paying your players. And that's what we're talking about here is revenue share. And, the SEC is going to set the bar on whether these players get, 16 million, 15 million, and I'm talking about total for the entire roster. So if you're Kirby Smart and, you're recruiting and part of your pitch is like, come here and get paid, you'd rather do it with fewer players, because if you have closer to 85, then you're dividing up the same amount of money among fewer players, and they get paid more. If it's 105, they're going to get less. And schools can do that. Like if you have if there's a roster cap at 105, you can still have walk-ons. I don't know that Georgia's going to have a bunch of walk-ons. You may see some schools with coaches who feel that way that don't even get all the way to 105, that just have, 100 or 95 players on the roster. And maybe that's the future of college football. It's not the direction that Nebraska's headed.
Right. I guess, I hadn't considered it from that angle. And maybe that's what Kirby was talking about with 105 NIL opportunities. But I guess my point was that, like, you can still keep your 85 scholarships. And then, like, if you like your walk-on guys, just have them try out and then give them a scholarship and don't worry about the NIL, right? Like, wouldn't that make sense?
It does, but then you're taking some money out of the star quarterback's pocket or the star defensive lineman's pocket. And, I think that's where they would rather maximize the amount that they can give their best players through the revenue share. And if you go 86 through 105 and then those guys are getting the same amount, and it remains to be seen with all of the details and the specifics of the settlement, the antitrust settlement. Like, can you pay your star quarterback more than what you pay your third string punter? Like, I mean, if they're both on scholarship, that's not all been worked out.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, especially in the case of a place like Georgia, where they, have a dozen or 24 5-star talents on their roster. Like, if they're going to be allowed to pay those players like what they see as market value. I mean, it's called revenue share.
Yeah.
And I think a football salary is a football salary, but that's just kind of the premise that I've been operating under. Well, we don't necessarily know if that's certainly going to be the case, and if the quarterback can make more than the punter in NIL, and NIL, of course, is going to continue to exist. There's no doubt the quarterback will make more than the punter in NIL, a lot more. But does he make more in the revenue share? I don't know.
Yeah, and there's so much gray area that has to be hashed out yet with all of this. So it'll be interesting to follow. Everybody's talking about Matt Rhule shutting down practice and explaining why Nebraska loses. And I looked at this from a little different angle. He talked about how when the lights come on, the players aren't doing the things that they're trained to do, and that's why they're losing close games. And to me, that is a culture thing. It's not necessarily like a technique thing or a teaching thing. That seems to me like a group of players who don't necessarily trust what they're being taught to do in practice, and they kind of freelance when they get out in live game action. How did you look at it?
I don't disagree with that assessment. It's a culture and a leadership thing, which go hand in hand. And instead of Matt Rhule, look, and first of all, no program, no teams practices on August 3rd, because that's when this video was captured. It was the fourth practice of the preseason. No team is in midseason form. No team is doing everything right and, completely locked in a practice in half pads on a Saturday night in the stadium with fans in the stands. Like, there is going to be a lapse in the right kind of focus that they're looking for from Ohio State or whoever it might be. You're still dealing with, even if it was NFL players, I think you would have that kind of a concern in an environment like that. But all of that said, where they want to be with that, when a moment like that arises and they come out at the start of a practice and it's a little loosey-goosey and, there's a fight in the first 15 minutes between a couple of linemen, which was just a little thing. Like, this stuff happens in football practice, but you did it in front of the fans and more than the fight, they just weren't locked in the way that Rhule wanted to see. Like, ideally, you'd want to see your leaders, and he called out Ty Robinson and he called out Jamari Butler in that video not because those guys were screwing around, but because he wanted those guys to step up and say what Matt Rhule was saying. Maybe not say it as eloquently, maybe not tell them this is the reason we lose, but if that's what they choose to say, then fine. And so they're still looking for that. They're still growing as a program. So yes, it is a culture thing. I think they've come a long way. They've come in 18 months under Matt Rhule. I mean, they've made huge progress in getting to the place that they want to be. But yeah, I mean, they're not a finished product. And they aren't going to be a finished product in December or January when this season is over. The thing that I think you have to remember with that is, like, that was a private moment between the team that Matt Rhule decided to put out there for people to see. So, and I don't think he decided to put it out there for people to see because, like, he wants the fans to just know everything about the program. I mean, yeah, you're looking for good content with the Chasing 3 doc, but he did it so the players would have accountability.
Yeah.
So the players would know that, like, hey, you guys, you can't get away with things that you may have gotten away with at times early in your career if you're an older player in this program. So there's a lot that's going on there with all of that. What I don't see it as is some big alarm bell that we need to sound because in the fourth practice of the preseason for 15 minutes, he wasn't getting the proper focus that he wants from his players.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting bit of insight and tremendous self-awareness from Rhule and the coaching staff that like they're seeing something and it explains what's been happening. Because for years we've heard like, look, these guys are doing it in practice. They look great in practice. We're hearing reports from people who've been there at practice, like this guy looks great. They're doing great things. Everything's working well. And then on game day, they weren't able to put it together. They couldn't do it on game day. And I I guess I'd never really thought about that, like that they're not doing the things in the games that they're being taught in practice, and that's what's causing them to lose. I just felt like it was an awesome piece of insight.
Yeah, and it's great that he's able to identify it in the moment.
Yeah,
like I think in a lot of times in the past, you might get to a game and go, I scratching my head. I can't figure out what's wrong because these guys are out there on the field and they're not. And this is if you're in the inside. This is if you're a coach or a player. How come it doesn't look like practice? Like why
yeah.
why do we do this Monday through Sunday through Friday and then we don't do it on Saturday? And that Rhule could recognize that coaching moment and stop them and talk to them about it represents important movement in the right direction to be able to get them to the right place. Like what he says at the end of that about how he will not accept losing. And it's going to be a long night for all of you if you don't, get this figured out right now. Like to me, that's a big part of what's been missing with Nebraska football in the last few years.
Accountability. Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, we heard that Will Bolt got an extension. He's going to be paid a base salary of $500,000. Is Nebraska in a position now with the expanded conference and the West Coast schools coming in where it makes it, I don't know, is it easier now to build a resume to get yourself to a point where you could host a regional?
Yeah, I do think it's going to have an impact on the RPI. It's going to have an impact on your strength of schedule to play series against Oregon and USC and UCLA. Now, I mean, it depends on how those programs trend. Do those programs like dip down to the level of the Big Ten now that they're not playing Stanford and Arizona State and others in the old Pac-12 every other weekend? I don't think so. I think their recruiting bases remain. The prestige of the league is, while it's a drop in baseball, I think that the Big Ten should rise to their level. And it's not like we've seen those teams in Omaha year after year after year, but I think people can agree that like they generally have played a higher level of baseball than what we've seen in the Big Ten. So for Nebraska, it should be an asset. It should help. It should expand the margin for error that Nebraska's had in being able to put itself in position to host regionals. That's been part of the struggle with Will Bolt is the margin for error is so slim. Like Nebraska's won Big Ten championships. It's in the regular season and the postseason now, and still not been able to get a regional at home. I mean, those are accolades. Those are the type of achievements that in a major conference get you a regional at home. So Nebraska and the Big Ten has been operating like, and it's been part of a league that like gets the return of being like a mid-major. And that's kind of what the Big Ten is in baseball.
Yeah.
And we'll see if the new schools can up the level. I think people around the Big Ten are hopeful that that's what happens.
I'm talking to Mitch Sherman of The Athletic. Do you have a sense of why this extension for Will Bolt was necessary and why they did it?
I mean, that's kind of what the MO has been for Troy Dannon since he's got to Nebraska. He came in and it was Dennis LeBlanc, the interim in his, in the week where Nebraska didn't have an athletic director who extended Amy Williams and, they extend Hoiberg in that week too. I believe that's the case. Like right as Nebraska was going into the men's tournament. But I mean, this is like the post Trev Alberts world for Nebraska, where coaches get rewarded for. And I'm not saying that Trev didn't do this. I mean, I think Trev would have done a lot of the same stuff if he had been here. But you turn the page from an era of athletic administration, And there was, I think, even more urgency to kind of set the tone. Like, this is the way it's going to be moving forward. Like, don't worry, things are not falling apart because the athletic director's gone. So they've re-upped John Cook. You know, he got a horse with his with his new contract. And, you know, now it's time to do Will Bolt because he had a successful season. Like, Nebraska's in a place as an athletic department where it has to stay ahead of this stuff, or you could see, you know, like with Hoiberg, you could see, and it's not the case with John Cook, but with Fred Hoiberg, you could see like a Michigan or who was looking for a coach this year, or, you know, somebody in the SEC or somebody in the Big 12, like, make a run at him. And so they had to be proactive, and I think Dannon wants to be proactive with all of his coaches in the sports that they consider to be moneymakers, and that's baseball when things are going at their highest possible level.
Last one, we'll get you out of here. Will Bolt get Nebraska to the College World Series?
Will he get Nebraska to the College World Series at some point in his career?
Yeah.
Boy. I'm on the fence on that one. I'll say, I'll say yes.
All right.
I'll be optimistic today.
All right.
Before he retires.
Answer may change tomorrow.
Leaves Nebraska.
Subject to further evaluation.
Could be 10 years down the road. I don't know. I mean, I'm like, we talked a minute ago about, like, what's the future of the Big Ten look like with these new programs, and I think that's a big part of answering that question. Like, is Nebraska going to be in a position to host a regional or host a super regional? Because if you can't do that stuff, then it's much more difficult to get to the College World Series.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Mitch. Appreciate you stopping in.
Okay, thanks a lot. Take care.
All right, that's Mitch Sherman of The Athletic.